Let's have a quick chat about how we're doing with the heat pump rollout across the UK, because we've got a lot of catching up to do when it compares to some of our neighbours across Europe. So our previous government set quite an ambitious target to be installing 600,000 new heat pumps in properties per year by 2028. And we know that 25% of the emissions from our nation are from heating our buildings. So we have to get on with it. We've only now been left with just 4 years to reach this target of 2028. What do you think? Do you think we're going to make it? Here, they went on to introduce some other targets in the energy security bill, which are not spoken of as often as the headline of the 600,000 heat pump installations per year. They set the target to reduce the capital cost by 25 to 50%. That's quite a big area there, between 25 and 50%. I prefer them to just stick to one number, the higher or the lower, but they expected that to be done by next year, 2025, and then eventually by 2030 they've set the goal to reach cost parity between owning and running a gas boiler and a heat pump, which we already know is possible in many instances, as long as it's properly installed, properly commissioned, and properly run properly, not probably, by the homeowner as well. So the bus grant was introduced to kind of grease the wheels here and help this. Well, previous to that, there was also the RHI, which I'll touch on a little bit, but they ring-fenced 450 million as a budget to try and help move this thing forward, and they zero rated the VAT on everything to do with heat pumps. So if you're having radiators upgraded at the same time or anything else, then all of that gets zero rated as well. Electrical work, the whole lot. So they started out by splitting that down and giving £5,000 per household, as long as you met all the eligibility requirements. But this wasn't means tested, it was the eligibility of the property to be able to get this grant. But they tried to, it started very slowly, so they tried to increase the speed of adoption and the rollout by increasing it to £7,500. But where did we start from? So the government stated that there were 55,000 hydronic heat pumps were fitted in 2021. But how many of them were eligible and claimed the RHI funding? Well, the government says 55,000. But let's come back to some of the numbers in a minute. So RHI was, you could get money towards the renewable heating costs in your home. Basically, you would front the capital investment, which could be considerable for some people, but then you would receive payments for 7 years, and they were based on the amount of heat that was generated by your heating system. So this is an interesting chart that is from an Ofgem report. You can also find a lot of this information on gov.uk as well in a different format, same numbers. If you can find somewhere on there where it shows 55,000 heat pumps were installed in a year, then great, you'd be proving the government's claims right. But I don't see anywhere where 55,000 could conceivably be installed. So I don't know what I'm missing here. Perhaps if there were only 21 plus 2.5, if there are only 23,500 that qualified for the RHI, perhaps there were another 30,000 somewhere that didn't qualify for the RHI. If someone in the industry from prior to 2021 could let me know, then that would be great. If you think that more than half of the installations were not qualifying for RHI, then perhaps the government isn't manipulating the figures. But they don't cite enough sources in their claims and in their reports and all of their documentation. It's difficult to see where these numbers are coming from. They just throw out numbers and they just assume that you'll just take them at their word. So anyway, they've said that we're starting from 55,000 heat pumps per year and that we want to increase that to 600,000. But the RHI showed less than 24,000. The government budgeted for 150 million, as we know, and that was originally 3 years of funding and £5,000. But because it didn't go very well, they've now increased that. Like I said before, you can have a look at the data on Ofgem or on gov.uk. Here's a little bit of the data that I extracted from an Excel spreadsheet, imported it in for this chart. What does it show us? Well, it shows us that ground source heat pumps seem to have quite a good market share back in 2014, and it shows the growing trend away from them. A little surge in 2021, but when you consider the surge in air source heat pumps as well, you can see that that seems to be just a one-off. And because the bus grant is very generous to air source heat pumps, and ground source heat pumps typically require a lot more capital investment, we're seeing less and less of them. There's also that the performance gap has closed on them as well. Back in 2014, ground source heat pumps were outperforming the costs of air source heat pumps by a considerable margin, whereas here we are now in 2024 and the performance gap between them is so close. In most cases it seems silly to go to all the extra expense of the capital investment needed to install ground source. But besides that little thing there, you can see that we had the blip where people were trying to get in by the deadline, the closing of the funding for the RHI, and so that increased considerably, more than double on the prior year. But then we just dropped right back, and the bus grant didn't start as the RHI ended, so there was a little bit of a gap there. But then it's increased again in 2023. That's, of course, the last year that we have full data for. We do have monthly reports throughout 2024. It's not looking much better, although there is improvement. We're still miles off 55,000, let alone the 600,000, of course. But the thing with the bus grant is it seems because it's helping more with the capital costs, the upfront costs, it seems like there is a higher adoption rate. But I don't know, a lot of these figures could be misleading. So they've extended the deadline to April 2028 for the bus funding, and they've allocated an additional 1.5 billion. The cost, they wanted to reduce the installation cost by 25 to 50%. The average installation cost is still in excess of £13,000. Whilst we've seen some costs fall, we've also seen inflation and other things. So I haven't corrected or adjusted anything for inflation. So there is a fall in the installation cost and it is reducing, but no way near 25%. It's actually close to 5 to 10% when we look at the average installation costs. And this is all the data that has been scraped from the bus applications and the bus grant. The average size of a heat pump, I thought this was interesting, is 10 kilowatts. If you look around the average homes, most average homes won't need that. Most average homes will be between 3 and 7 kilowatts, something like that. So interesting that the bus grant is still favouring bigger, larger, draftier properties, I guess. And that was a similar case for RHI, that a lot more big heat pumps were installed. This was a fascinating document. They published it in 2016, but actually a lot of the research was done in 2014 that went into the publication of this document. So by the time it was published, it was already well out of date, but it doesn't get many predictions correct in there. It's interesting. I admit that we're 10 years on now from when they were doing this, but they forecasted that we would be installing 50,000 heat pumps per year, even without any government intervention or incentivization. And they have this whole thing in the document that is fixated on 40 kilowatt heat pumps and how important that is. And I'm not quite sure why. And I did read this report and reread it, and it wasn't making a lot of sense to me. And I thought maybe I'm missing some of the context. And, was there an initial what was the brief that they were given, and why were they after this 40 kilowatt heat pump? But that's definitely not a heat pump that you need for mass adoption, unless you're fitting them in small blocks of flats, perhaps. So how are we actually going to reach the 600,000 per year? Ultimately, it's going to come down to more installers. If what I'm hearing, both anecdotally and seeing some of the data, is that good installers, they are booked up. They are in a lot of demand, and even some of the big companies that are scaling out at a huge level, they have a long waiting list at the moment. But some of these figures are interesting. Currently, for the bus grant with MCS, they have 1,286 registered installers. Those installers redeemed 23,875 vouchers. That's 18.5 installations per year for each registered business. Of course, that's oversimplifying it, because the top 5% of the installers were they were responsible for 60 or 70% of the installations. I can't remember the exact figures, but a small handful of the bigger businesses, CB Heating, Octopus Energy, etc., those guys, they were responsible for the vast majority of these vouchers being issued and heat pumps. And the smaller businesses, there's some smaller ones out there that are just doing 1 or 2 heat pumps a year. So, but how many are we going to need? If we scale it up at those same sort of ratios, we're going to need 32,432 registered installers. But basically, it's a 25-fold increase that we have to achieve, and we've got 4 years to do that. Let me know in the comments now, how do you think this is going to be possible or feasible? Or do you think it's just pie in the sky? We've had government intervention. We've had quite generous government intervention. We're seeing a lot of good things in the industry. I'm just an outsider, just as a spectator from the sidelines, seeing and speaking to a few heating engineers who have been quite generous with their time and chatting to me kind of off the record. They're not comfortable to come on the channel just yet, but maybe we'll have some installers come on and we can discuss some of these things in the future. But looking at some of the training, some of the things that are happening with HeatGeek, some of the other apps that are helping with heat loss assessment and system design. You've got the things like Heatly and other things like that, where we want to use great technology to heat our homes, but we need to use great technology to get that heat pump and the great technology that's heating our homes. Does that make sense? It's interesting that the technology that has been used by a lot of people to design the system and everything, it's so old-fashioned and archaic. And it was interesting to me the amount of installers that I saw are still using Excel spreadsheet or pen and paper, and that's fine and it does the job, but those things are very time consuming, and that's one of the things that we need to do to drive down the cost, drive down the capital investment, and also free up the man hours of these really valuable heating engineers so that they can spend more time putting in more heat pumps. If you can find enough technology that you can, both through the technology and through them doing the task, a repetitive task. There was one article, I think it was on LinkedIn, talking about how potentially heat pump installation times could be halved if we both embrace the technology that will help us with the process, but also as installers do more and more and more of these, there will be things that they will not necessarily cut in the corners of the quality, but things that they'll just become quicker at, that they'll become more comfortable with doing. And they talked about some of the things with, even just preparing bases and running external pipe work, and some of these things that a lot of heating engineers that will be coming from the world of boilers, they won't be so proficient is the wrong word, but they won't be so well rehearsed and so quick at doing it. So I hope you found something in here interesting. What's your perspective? You may be an installer. Let me know what you're seeing inside the industry. You may be a homeowner. Let me know if you've had a good experience or a poor experience, any of your frustrations. And if you've got any other observations, please let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you'll join me for another one.